Hello and welcome to Mentor Talks live event organized by Talks and Folks Agency for mentors and public speakers. My name is Dusan Basalo and our today's topic is the world in strategic vacuum. What's next? My colleague Katarina is today with me and she will be supporting us and moderating your questions. Hello, Katarina.
Hi, Dusan. I'm so happy that I'm part of this Mentor Talks with Mr. Kerim.
Thank you very much for your support and a message to all of you who are participating and watching us at the moment. So if you have any questions for Mr. Kerim during our webinar, please be free to write them down within the YouTube channel under our video, and we will try to answer to all your questions in the following part of the webinar. It's my great pleasure to dive into this topic with one of our mentors and speakers, Mr. Srgjan Kerim. So please let me introduce Mr. Kerim in a couple of sentences. He's very successful and experienced diplomat, economist, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and President of the 62nd session of the United Nations General Assembly from 2007 till 2008. He brings with him a wealth of experience in international political and economic affairs and extensive knowledge of the United Nations system. Dr. Kerim has proven himself as one of the most respectable diplomatic figures on an international scale. He was also a visiting professor at the University of Hamburg in Germany and at New York University. Besides his career in diplomacy, he was active also in business context as special envoy of the Westdeutsche Allgemeine Zeitung media group for Southeastern Europe and general manager of Host Holding based in Vienna. Dr. Srgjan Kerim is one of the most famous diplomats in Southeastern Europe. Actually, he is the most successful UN president from Balkan as he was elected by 192 member states of the United Nations. Cosmopolitan and charismatic person with a long experience in four fields: academic, politics, business, and diplomacy. He wrote 13 books on international economics, politics, and poetry also. Dr. Kerim speaks more than 5 languages and has covered and traveled 1.5 million miles in Lufthansa airplane. So traveling all over the world, but today being here with us. Welcome, Mr. Kerim, and thanks very much for joining us today.
Hello, Dusan. Hello, distinguished audience. Your kind introduction, which was mixed with a little bit of flattering, obliges me to justify whatever you said, and I will do my best to do so. So please go ahead, and I'm all yours now and to the audience, and I'm curious to hear what would you like to start with.
Thanks again for being with us, and we will cover a lot of interesting topics which are actually connected with the current situation in the world and have influence on all of us and our lives. So let me start immediately, because we have 1 hour. Let me start immediately with one question. So you were an active player for the last 3 decades and participant in global processes during very challenging times. Actually, you were the president of the United Nations General Assembly from 2007 till 2008, when the world economical crisis was knocking at our doors. So having all these experiences and I would say bird's eye view on the current situation, how would you describe this current situation in the world, and what would you say that is expecting us in the next couple of months and years to come?
If asked to describe today's world in one word, guess what the answer would be? Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin? Not because I'm trying to make an equation between the world and Bitcoin, but rather as a comparison because we are facing an unprecedented, volatile, and unpredictable world, full of risks and controversies, not to speak about a series of paradoxes which dominate the scene of what we call in our common languages international relations and affairs. This is why I compare it with the Bitcoin. Let me mention 10 examples of paradoxes to draw the whole picture of our world. We are in the 21st year of the 21st century now. 30 years ago, the communist system in Eastern Europe fell apart from the Soviet Union through the whole of what was called Warsaw Pact and Yugoslavia. The conclusion was of politics as well as of social science, the rivalry between the capitalist and the communist bloc is over, so is the Cold War between East and West. Once the Eastern European countries joined the Euro-Atlantic integration, meaning NATO and the European Union. Is it true? I would say not exactly. The truth is slightly different. The Cold War between East and West is not over yet. It's going on. Now we have Russia and China representing the East, and the United States and the European Union, the West. They're using almost the same narrative and methods of the past. So this is a paradox by itself. The second paradox is the fact of an ongoing rivalry between capitalism and communism in the face of the United States of America and of China. It is an ideological war, among other things. China is led by its Communist Party, and it has become the most powerful country in the world after the United States. The Communist Party of China is by far the largest political organization in the world, with its 87 million members. Only 10 countries in the world have a larger population than the Communist Party of China. The third paradox is the fact that the United States, as the richest country in the world, have 724 billionaires. China, though, communist China, I underline, has 698 billionaires, almost the same number. By the way, do you know which city has the most billionaires in the world?
Well,
it's not an American city. No, it's Beijing.
Beijing. Mm-hmm.
Yes, not New York, not Chicago, not LA. It's Beijing. Again, speaking about a paradox, because we are talking about a communist country led by a communist party. Fourth paradox. Migration has become the boogeyman of the European Union and of the United States, especially under President Trump. Amazing. Look at the history of Europe and the United States. the migration waves in Europe and between Europe and to the United States have dominated for 3 centuries, from the 17th to the 20th century. Just to mention, 44 million, as an example, 44 million Americans are of Irish origin. And Ireland has only 4 or 5 million population now. Again, another paradox. The fifth paradox. Amid the digital era and the process of globalization driven by the progressive development of ICTs, meaning information and communication technologies, the political systems on the national level propagate nationalism and populism as a model of government. What a paradox. The sixth one is the discrepancy between the global challenges, such as global warming, terrorism as a political tool, last but not least, pandemics such as the COVID-19, on one hand, and the pertinent efforts to reject global governance by the nation states, which are presented as the only acceptable form of government. The seventh paradox, democracy. Democracy is in a deep crisis and deteriorating even in the states which traditionally were regarded as a role model of democracy worldwide. The same states which tried to expand it in those parts of the world where it never had deep roots. The eighth paradox. The major demographic indicators clearly show that the West, speaking concretely about the United States and Europe, has a rapidly declining growth of population and its share in the total world population. It has been reduced to less than 10% today from almost 30% 100 years ago. What a change. And again, a paradox within these changes. At the same time, in a world where 10 out of 100 people are white, racism is growing and gaining ground. It becomes even grotesque while watching the national sports teams of the major Western European countries and the US, where other colors dominate. The ninth paradox. Various science and education are on the bottom of foreign investments and far away of becoming national priorities in their development strategies in an era in which economic growth and development fully depend on technological progress, which means on research and developments which are connected with education and science. Again, an obvious paradox. And the last, the 10th one, a very significant one, international organizations, especially the United Nations, are losing ground day by day, year by year, becoming total outsiders in world affairs. Although, and in spite of the fact that global challenges and phenomena dominate the scene and require global solutions. What a better example we can have now, which is bothering all of us, and this discussion today is one of the consequences of it. It's the COVID-19. COVID-19 is a virus. We live in a world of viruses, starting with our everyday tools, the computers, which are full of viruses. Having made the experience with SARS-1, with many other kind of viruses, all the way to this SARS-2, and we find out that we are helpless. We are locking ourselves into our national borders, and the international organizations, especially the one which has been established in order to function and to help the world in the cases of pandemics, the World Health Organization totally failed in its activities. And I must say, if you ask me, I'm sorry, it may sound a little bit personal, but I want to be honest with all of you, and this is my nature. If I was this gentleman who is the head of that organization, I would have resigned immediately. Instead of telling us stories every month, every week, which never turn out to be true and never match the developments on the ground. So, all in all, living with all these paradoxes, as I said, this world reminds me on Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is also a result of a paradox which has to do with the total failure of the national banks and the commercial and investment banks. If they would have done their job properly in these 2-3 decades in the past, there wouldn't be a need for cryptocurrencies and for Bitcoin. But that's another story again. Here, I would like to stop and give you a chance to steer the discussion and the whole proceeding.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of challenges that are taking place currently in the world. So I know it is very hard to predict the future, especially the future of the whole world. But from your experience and what you have seen during the last couple of decades, are we heading towards escalation of armed conflicts or maybe some bigger armed conflict in the world? Or maybe we are heading towards the global alignment. And if we are heading towards global alignment, what could be this point, or what could be this thing that could align all those different interests that are currently existing in the world?
Well, let me switch a little bit from skepticism, because all the paradoxes I've listed, they speak rather in favor of a sort of skepticism than optimism. But on the other hand, I must say that I see a light at the end of the tunnel. But first, we have to face the dismantling and the falling apart of the world order which was established after the World War II. The world has changed so tremendously that we need new methods of international cooperation and work. We need a global identity, because national institutions are incapable of handling global ecology, global economy, global science and technology. And I think leadership is also lacking. The world needs leaders who are global thinkers. Nobody can prevent and will prevent them of defending and taking care of their national interests. But that's only one dimension of what we are facing today as our global problems. The recent initiative of the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to talk to his colleagues about global warming, about climate change, is only a beginning, a trace of something which has to grow, of a new order where nations will gather within different frameworks, be it in the G20, be it in a totally reformed United Nations, because the United Nations, as they are now, they can't perform in the way the world needs. The structure of the Security Council is obsolete and does not correspond with today's balance of power. And the rivalry and attempts to have a dominating power is also obsolete. These times are over. We can look back in history and maybe we can identify that in the 16th century, Portugal was the dominating nation, in the 17th, Spain, in the 18th, France, in the 19th, United Kingdom, in the 20th, the United States, but we are now in the 21st century. And the 21st century does not allow anymore for anybody's domination, including the United States of America. Having said that, it doesn't mean that I'm not a friend of the United States, and then I don't admire many accomplishments which the United States have done in its history and its contribution, especially in the Second World War, to liberate the world from Nazism and fascism, and to establish democracies in Europe, in Japan, and other corners of the world. But the world has changed to that extent today, and it has shifted. The axe of power is not anymore in the West, it's shifting to the East. Asia is becoming more and more important. Economically, look at the global supply chains. Let's talk about economy. Economics has always, an economy has driven the world, and technologies as well. They are day by day, month by month, year by year, dominating and having the majority of these supply chains in the most strategically important industries, such as the automotive industry, the computer industry, the ICTs, electronics. Everything is, let's say, now in a network which is global. And ask, for instance, for Mercedes and the people in the history of that, very prominent and one of the most popular, if not the most popular car in the world. It was made in Germany, in Stuttgart and the area around Stuttgart until 50 years ago. In the last 50 years, so many suppliers have showed up, all the way from China, Malaysia, you name it, South America, everywhere, who are making now the same car, the same brand called Mercedes, but it is very global, very international, not German in the sense of the word in which it used to be when it was and when it started its production and it became popular. And the same goes for many other products, many other brands in the world. So this is the answer. We need a way how to globally communicate and try to resolve all the problems, from global warming through global economic problems, trade, services, transportation, everything, science, research and development. Look how helpless we are with this COVID-19, with the virus, because we are still locked. Everybody doing for himself, trying something instead of joining forces and trying with joint efforts and through joint efforts to find a remedy for the virus, because the virus doesn't care and recognize borders. It's us. This is why I wrote, by the way, my latest book and gave it the title World Without Borders.
Yeah, we will announce the book, and also we'll send a link so the people can see it and also order it, because it's very good book. I wanted to ask you, since you were mentioning the superpowers in 17th, 18th, 19th century and so on, do you see China as this superpower for the 21st century, which would lead the world or influence the world the most? A couple of days ago, when two of us were talking over the phone, you mentioned that you have some doubts about it, especially connected with the currency, because every superpower that was leading the world has a dominant currency in the history. Is it the case with China also, or it's a little bit different?
It is not only different because of China, it's different because of the process of globalization. People have a totally wrong perception and imagination about globalization. Globalization is not a concept. Globalization is not a political idea. Globalization is a process, unstoppable, continuous process, which is caused by the tremendous progress of technologies, especially ICTs, information and communication technologies. And this process of globalization does not allow anymore for anyone to believe that he can or she take over and be the dominant superpower of the world. Neither China nor the United States nor any third party, European Union, whoever, can do that. This is a multipolar world, a globalized world, and everybody has to play its own role within it. China is very important, as I said, through the supply chains, through its investments. It's investing all the way around in Africa, in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, partly, everywhere. Many other Asian countries as well. So I wouldn't occupy our time and thoughts in speculating who is going to take over, who is going to be the superpower. There will be no superpower. There will be more powers in this world. everyone and each in its own way. The major problem is the mutual tolerance, to stop this ideological fighting, which doesn't make sense. It's up to the Chinese people to decide what they want, who will lead them, and what they will do. I know the ideological constraints in the West. I'm completely aware, because it's a communist party. But on the other hand, this same communist party, which has been criticized for being authoritarian, non-democratic, no freedom, no this, no that, has managed a population of 1.4 billion not to starve and not to be on the verge of poverty as many other parts of this world, unfortunately. And that's a great success. And that has been done within 40 years. China has started its reforming process, and today's performance of China is only 40 years old.
Okay, so we also have a question regarding the position of Africa in today's world. So I would like to ask Katarina to join and to ask the question that we have from the audience.
So the question is, what do you think about rising geopolitical importance of Africa? We all know that China is known as a world factory, but with rising middle class in China, it is not so cheap to manufacture products in China.
Well, if you ask me about Africa, I will tell you immediately, Africa is the continent of the future. Africa has went through hell in the 18th, 19th, 20th century until all these countries became independent and equally, more or less equally treated members of the United Nations. But with its growing population, Africa will become, just to mention the example of Nigeria, in 2050, that's 30 years from now, Nigeria will be the third largest country in the world with more than 500 million people population, after and behind China and India. So Africa has a lot of potential. It is a very rich continent. Its natural resources are incredible. And African nations, through their process of emancipation, through the African Union, which is their political organization, will not wait and look how others treat it still as a, let's say, ground where they can fish and make profit. Africa will become, as I said, 50 years from now and in the next 100 years altogether, one of the most propulsive continents. So I see a bright future for that continent. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And when you speak about all these tendencies in the world at the moment, so how do you see the reflection of it on economical situation in the world in the next period of time? What can we expect regarding the global trade, the stock market, the employment rate in the world? What kind of direction do you see regarding the global economy?
Let me start with the employment rate. This is what people are most interested in. I think that we have a positive tendency ahead of us, that employment will rise, unemployment will be reduced for two reasons. There are a lot of new professions emerging from the new way of life, from the new technologies, services above all, and this will provide for people a lot of opportunities to find jobs. That's very important for the young generation, especially. On top of that, I think that the economic growth generally will start again to find its normal, regular pace, starting with China, because China and its economic growth is very influential on the global growth rate, if we speak on the world level. The same goes for the United States, for some South American countries, for parts of Asia. Europe is still having problems, especially because of this grave pandemic situation. But generally speaking, I see positive cycles for employment and good opportunities, which is very important for the working class. People will be required for the dynamics of the economics generally. That's one part. The stock market will definitely stabilize and get its new peaks. But of course, for that we need also a more stable and predictable relationship between the United States and China, the United States and Russia, the European Union and the United States, and the European Union and Russia and China and other important countries in the world. This is very important, and I think that this is something which I see soon coming. They will more talk to each other than about each other. I will again stress and mention this very positive and good sign coming from Washington with the online conference which was organized by the President of the United States. Then this agreement which was signed by the United States and China on cooperation on climate change. This is very important because that will have implications on renewable energies, on many other new industries and products which we will need in order to lower the greenhouse emissions and the carbon dioxide emissions. So this is a good platform, I would say, and presumption for making progress.
So you were mentioning at the beginning the necessity of restructuring United Nations. And what about European Union, since most of our listeners are from Europe, and this is a topic very relevant to all of us. How do you see European Union in the next couple of years? I guess there is a big necessity also to change some things, to adapt, maybe to adapt it also to these new times, the new situation that is happening at the moment.
I fully agree with the implications of your question. A stronger European Union a reformed European Union, which means deepening the integration. It is not enough only to have the euro. The Europeans must be aware that as single nations, they are predestined to be the outsiders of tomorrow's and even today's world. So only with joint forces, Europe needs badly its own defense system. If I was a European leader, I would insist on that. I would also restructure the relations with the United States through NATO. Why not to have an alternative to NATO, where the European Union on one side with its own defense systems and army would sign a treaty with the United States and Canada on common defense, a political and military treaty on common defense, but which will be different than the one which was signed 60 years ago, because the Europeans have already demonstrated their ability, their capability to produce aircrafts equally good as the American Boeing aircrafts. So if they can do it with the Airbus, why not with the military aircrafts? Why not developing its own military industry and become, in that respect, and more independent power? Because you cannot have a joint foreign policy without a joint defense policy. That doesn't work. They go hand in hand. And the European Union must be aware that if it wants to be on equal foot with the United States, with Russia, with China, with others, with Brazil, India, Indonesia, all these big countries, the European Union must work on strengthening its own ranks and institutions. It needs more than a euro. It needs to have joint bonds on the market. The attempt now made, which was unfortunately done out of a necessity caused by the terrible COVID situation in Europe, to start having a sort of joint guarantees for loans on the money market. That's a giant step forward in the right direction. And it will go from monetary policy. You cannot have, we know that, all the economists know, they have studied it, students of economics, undergraduates, graduates know that you cannot have only a monetary policy in order to conduct economic policy. You need fiscal policy as well. So that step must be done as well in Europe. There is a lot of work. Europe must become a workshop by developing many new instruments within the European Union, strengthening its political and economic unity. And that, of course, includes the enlargement to Southeastern Europe, to embrace the rest of these few countries in Southeastern Europe which are still knocking on the door, but they're not letting them in. But that must be done. That must be done for geopolitical reasons and geoeconomic reasons, because that's a very, I would say, strange and weird situation not to have countries which are almost in the middle of Europe and the European Union to become part of it and I hope that this process will be accelerated. It is too slow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when we speak about this time frame, do you have any idea, or maybe you think of a date when this could happen in the maybe this decade or the next one or next couple of years?
Oh, listen, I'm you know, I don't want to be like someone who would do a forecast, but what I would warmly recommend to the European leaders is to do it as soon as possible, because time is not in favor of Europe. It is against the European Union, and especially after the Brexit, which is a terrible handicap for both sides, for the European Union and for Great Britain. I would recommend to speed up the process of integration of other parts of Europe. So I wouldn't bet on a time frame, but if they don't do it in the next decade, then I think they will make a big mistake with all its consequences.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question from the audience. Since we were traveling all around the world, we spoke about the US, about Europe, about Africa and Asia. We have some listeners also from South America, and they are asking about the position of South America in the world, especially when we speak about Brazil, when we speak about Chile, and when we speak of some other countries which can have a lot of influence in the next couple of years. How do you see the position of South America in the today's world?
South America is in a similar situation, but much better, I would say, from the level of development and stage of development compared to Africa. But it is also a continent with a lot of potential, and a continent which could have a much better and great future, provided they speed up the integration process. They must be aware of that. By the way, the integration process, the economic integration process, was one of the examples where the South Americans, the Latin Americans, were champions in the past. They started very early, but then they slowed it down, unfortunately, and they never made this qualitative change which Europe managed to do, to integrate themselves on a higher level than on the level of just trade, free trade and free trade arrangements. They have all the preconditions for that. And I'm personally very much attached to Latin America and to these people there. By the way, their mentality and our mentality in Southeastern Europe are very similar. Very similar. We speak very different languages, but the mentality is very close. And I think that they have highly talented people there and a lot of potential, and they should speed up their integration process in order to catch up with Asia, with Europe, and especially with the United States and Northern America and Canada and the United States. So I believe that the Latin Americans have to focus on this aspect, as I said, on economic, but also political integration, and to fight fiercely to get their seat on the Security Council. because that's the only zone and continent in the world which does not have nuclear weapons, which is also, I would say, not only a matter of compliment for them, but their advantage, and they deserve, if not for other reasons, for that one, to be on the Security Council, and not at least because they have contributed a lot to peacekeeping missions and many activities in the United Nations and in other international organizations, in the World Trade Organization, in UNCTAD, in many other organizations. So I'm a fan of Latin America.
Since we have some 10 minutes till the end of our today's webinar, I would like to invite all listeners to ask a question within the YouTube chat, and we will answer those questions. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you additional one. So the year 2020 was called the year of the virus. Now we see that the 2021 is not much different than this. So is this situation, which is now called new normal, really something which is being normal and will be normal in the next couple of years? And will we ever go back to our everyday habits that we had till 2020, or we will permanently create new ones regarding social interaction, regarding online world, regarding constant global threats to our health, and so on?
Well, it's a pity and very, I would say, ironic that our online meetings and this online holding of webinars, conferences, and everything happened out of, let's say, a need, because it was caused and provoked by the virus, by COVID-19. But it's the future anyway. Even without the COVID-19, these information and communication technologies are developing to that extent, and also robotics, and artificial intelligence, that my grandchildren's generation will absolutely see it as a normal. For us, back of normalcy is over. The world is changing, and it has changed now. Of course, the only aspect which we all need, regardless of what generation we belong to, is to have a vaccine, a remedy to cope with the virus, and to not to allow the virus to disturb our way of life totally. But life has and will change in this direction which we are facing now, because of the technological progress and changes we are facing. We are even not aware of, imagine maybe 50 years from now, you will not even need the profession of a driver. The cars will go by their own without a driver, and that's not anymore science fiction. What used to be 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, or 70 years ago, science fiction, is nowadays reality. And the same goes, we have to look with the same eyes to the next 60, 70 years, but not to make the confusing and conclusion that it is caused and it is provoked by this very virus, which is definitely a trouble for us. But I believe the medical experts, the epidemiological experts, the technology itself will be so advanced that we will also be the winners against this virus. But in spite of that, that will not prevent these changes coming, which will also change many of our habits, which we have practiced for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But we should not forget and think how our great-grandparents lived, what was their way, of living. There were generations and generations who never learned even where the capital of their own country is. And now you can travel in every corner of this world, and we are not aware of that in everyday's life. We are running through our work, profession, obligations, family, and so, but we don't have time enough to think about how history has developed, and we did also the habits of the people have changed from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 questions from the audience. So, Katerina, I would like to ask you to share the first one, please.
So the first question is, Japan, China, and ASEAN recently signed a new trade agreement. The US was not on the table. Was that a mistake? What role will ASEAN play, since you spoke on Africa and Latin?
Well, the US were not part of it because President Trump preferred this policy one-on-one. He used to practice something which one would call in the mythology, you can never break 12 sticks, take them one by one and break them. But it turned out to be a failure, and it did not help neither the American economy, nor the world economy, nor the relations with China. So all trade agreements, especially the multilateral ones, are very useful. They provide new opportunities, not only for the traders, but also for production, for new jobs, for the people. So, and for the efficiency of the economy, because that makes the prices lower because of a simple principle which is valid in all economies. That's the economy of scale. So I think that the United States will soon make a shift in this regard and join this kind of arrangements, international trade arrangements, because it's for their benefit. And I don't have doubts that the Biden administration is thinking in this direction.
Mm-hmm. So in the next couple of weeks, we will have another talk with you, but more regarding your career and maybe some interesting events that happened during your career that you participated in. But for the end, I would like to ask you maybe to share with us just a little bit, just a small part of this diplomatic career, or especially the part when you were the president of the UN General Assembly. So who did you meet? What kind of experience is that? So what kind of emotions are present in this diplomatic and high-level politic world and activities? I know that you were the president during the first visit of the Pope to United Nations, if I'm right.
Yes, you are right. That was one of the highlights of my presidency. I thought that a visit of the Pope will contribute again to connect religion and politics in a sense that we have together build roads for a new globally thinking population and world. We need a global conscience, a universal conscience. And a universal conscience cannot be reached by division based on religion, on nationality, on ethnicity, on color, on race. That's wrong. That's obsolete. That's something which belongs to the museum of history. We need a very universally thinking people. And that's what I tried during my presidency. I always preferred to have on the agenda issues which connect people and which show people that we cannot tackle problems without each other and against each other, but together. One of them was climate change. You cannot imagine what an effort and what a, excuse me for the term, but really pain in the ass for me was as a president, because I had to confront at the same time then the United States, Russia, China, India, Brazil, and few others. Big boys. They were all strongly opposed to the idea to have this on the UN agenda. But I said to myself, no way, I will do it by all means, and I managed to do it, talking to them, persuading them, and asking them not to oppose it. So climate change became during the 62nd session, of which I was the president, 2007, 2008, a issue on the agenda of the UN. Until then, it was a taboo. It was not allowed by the big shots. That was one thing. The other thing, and I said already about the Pope and his visit, and how to bring the religions together and not to use them and instrumentalize them for terrorists, for other extremist activities, and to confront people on that basis, which is horrible. If people believe in God, they must all have the same approach. There is no Catholic God or Orthodox God or Jewish God or I don't know, Muslim God or whatever. That doesn't exist. That exists only in the heads of the people because they have been brainwashed for decades and centuries in the wrong way. There must be a universal thinking and approach to everything, to religion, to faith, to economics, to politics, to education, to research, to science. Ask the scientists. They are fully aware of that. They couldn't care less about their nationality. They help each other. They sit together. They write together. They research together. So this was my leading idea. And to finish with this subject, the same was with the reform of the Security Council. I saw that 17 years before my presidency, 17 years, people were talking about the need to reform the Security Council. And I said, listen, that's nonsense. Talking means nothing, because the United Nations is an organization of member states of governments. Governments must negotiate. So I made them all, and I insisted that to be based on a consensus, not on voting. I would have also get the majority, but I didn't want to divide the assembly, the United Nations, with a majority and minority. So with consensus, which was reached on the very last day of my presidency, the United Nations have decided to switch from fruitless talks to negotiations in order to reform the Security Council. Unfortunately, since then, 11 years have passed, and these negotiations are still in a deadlock, which is too bad. This is why I'm saying, this is why I began with counting and listing the paradoxes. The UN doesn't render itself a good service. A stronger, more articulated, determined leadership is needed for the UN and for the other international organizations.
Mm-hmm. And for the end, a couple of weeks ago, you published your 13th book called The World Without Borders. So can you tell us just a little bit, what can we find in this book? Also, we are writing down the link where people can order the book. It will be soon in English also. But what's in the book? What does it cover?
Well, the idea of this book is to plead for the creation of a universal conscience of people, because this globalized world definitely is asking for that, and time has come where it has to be done. We have all to be missionaries and fighting for that. This is why I named my book World Without Borders, because I'm deeply convinced that borders start in our heads. The first borders we are drawing are in our brain, in our heads, with prejudice towards others whom we even don't know. But we have in advance already a border. Then the next stage is the border to the neighbor, to your left and to the right. You must make and you create a border and demarcation line between his land and your land. And then you have a fence as a result of that between you and your neighbor. And this fence is very often a subject of quarrel and conflict. Then the third one is the borders within the states of regions, sub-regions, cities, and finally the state borders. And it was a revolution in Europe when people said that one day there will be no borders between France and Germany, who fought each other for centuries and killed millions of each other, French Germans and Germans French. And what happened? It was not a miracle, and it was not a disaster. On the contrary, it became a very normal way that between France and Germany, there is no border anymore. And that's, for me, not only the European future, that's the future for Africa, that's the future for South America, for many parts of Asia. Absolutely. And also for the United States and Canada. But I know that people may believe that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not. I have the right for a vision, and all visions starts, and when they start, people are suspicious, people are skeptical, they don't believe in it, but as time goes by, I think there will be more and more fans and supporters of it. And this is why I wrote this book. That was the idea and the rationale behind it.
Thank you, Mr. Kerim, for all the insights that you gave us tonight. And I hope to see you again in a month or two with the new webinar speaking a little bit more about your career and all the interesting events that happened and that you went through.
I thank you very much, and especially the audience, and wish you all the best.
So thanks to all of you who were listening to us today. And if you'd like to have Mr. Kerim as a speaker at your event or as a mentor for your career, please visit Talks and Folks website and find his profile and send us inquiry, of course. So thank you for today and see you again soon. Bye-bye.